Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Modern React 19 series. So, in this series, in this chapter, we are going to talk about state and events. In the previous chapter, we learned how to build reusable components and how components communicate using props. But so far, our application has mostly been static, and that's not how real application work. User clicks buttons, they type into forms, they open menus, they select options, they interact with the application, and the interface needs to respond. So today's question is, how does React make our UI interactive? The answer comes down to two fundamental concepts: state and events. In this chapter, we will understand how React stores changing data, how we respond to user actions, and how a state change results in an updated user interface. By the end of this chapter, we will build a small interactive counter using React 19 and TypeScript. So, what is state? Let's start with a state. So, what exactly do we mean when we say states? Simply put, state is data that belongs to a component and can change over time. Think about a counter. Initially, the value might be 0. The user clicks a button. Now the value becomes 1. The user clicks again. Now it's 2. That changing value is state. And here's the important part: when state changes, React can update the user interface to reflect that new state. So state is essentially the component changing data. Props versus state. Before we continue, let's connect this with something we learned in chapter 4. Props and state are two concepts you will use constantly in React, and it's important not to confuse them. Props are data passed into a component by its parent. State is data managed by the component itself. Props are read only from the child's perspective. State can change over time. So here's a simple mental model. Props are external inputs. State is internal changing data. If you remember that distinction, you will already have a much cleaner understanding of React architecture. The use state hook. So this is where the state this is where the use state hook comes in. I am going to import use state from React. I will show you my Visual Studio. So let's start. And I have already put it. So constant count, set count is equal to use state. I put the initial value 0. So I don't want to confuse you, so let me remove few things from here. Now I just want to display count. So this is nothing, it's just a JSX. So you can see the value 0 has been shown in the screen. So I will make a proper counter for you so we can understand it. So what is the count doing here? This is just storing the value. And set count, how do I ask React to change it? The pattern is something we will see everywhere in modern React development. So let's put this into practice. I'm going to create a simple counter. We will start with we already started with the state value of 0, and then I'm going to create a button that increments the value. The important thing is Notice here is that we are not manually changing some HTML element. Instead, we are changing the state. React sees that the state had changed and update the UI accordingly. So if I click the button, 0 becomes 1. Click again, it becomes 2. And we now will have for our first interactive React component. So let's do it and see this syntax very carefully. On click, C is capital. Let's do it practically. Button, button. Set count 1 plus 1. Let's make it increment. And where here I'm going to decrement it. I will go back to my screen. I'm just refreshing. You see it's incrementing as decrementing. So instead, let's put here so it looks better. We are just changing the data. The React is taking care of the UI. So now let's move to another slide. Events in React. Now let's talk about the other half of the equation, events. An event represents something that happens in the interface. A user clicks a button, a user types into an input, a form is submitted, an element receives focus. React provides event handlers that allows us to respond to these actions. So we will commonly see names such as on click, on change, on submit, on focus. One small detail is to notice in the naming convention. React uses camel case for event handlers. So when we write on click, it should be on and capital C, not small c. Then I will pass that function to the button using on click. And we want React to call the function where the user clicks. We don't want to execute the function while React is rendering the component. So this is a small detail, but it's very common beginner mistake which people make. Now let's move to next slide. So this is again about this events. This is nothing, just a small syntax. If we want to create a function, that can be done as well. So now, one thing which we have to remember while we are creating a function, for example, handle click, this first part is correct. Do not use the brackets. So now we already did it. So we have in this slide you can understand when the user performs an action, we are just calling the updater. We are not directly modifying count. We are asking React to update a state, and that's an important React principle. Don't mutate state directly. Use the state updated function. Once we update the state, React can determine that the components need to be rendered again. So state changes trigger a re-render. Let's uh, imagine our state starts at 0. The user clicks the button we call set state. React receives the new state. Uh, React then renders the component again based on that new state, and the user sees the uploaded UI. So the mental model is state changes, React renders the component, UI reflects the new state. We don't manually find an element and change its text. So now let's move to functional updates. Now let's look at a slightly more advanced but very important pattern. Sometimes the new state depends on the previous state. In this situation, React provides an updater function form. Instead of React writing set count plus one, we can use set count previous count, uh, something like this, which you are seeing in the screen. And this is recommended when update depend upon the previous state. Now let's move to, okay, so now this is another common uh, misconception. State is only the numbers, so that's not true. State can represent many different types of data. We can store strings, we can store booleans, we can store arrays, we can store objects. And the important question isn't can this data be stored in the state. The better question is, does the data need to change over time and affect when the component displays? If the answer is yes, state may be appropriate. We will become much better at making that decision as we build more complex applications. So now let's look at a very practical example. So suppose I have an input where the user enters their name. We can create a piece of state or name. Then we connect the input value to that state. When the user types something, the on change event fires. We update the state with a new value, and React renders the updated value back into the input. This is called as controlled input. And this may be an interview question as well. What is the controlled input? And this pattern is extremely important when building React forms. Then type, okay, so user types, event fires, state changes, and React just update the UI. So let's try to make it. Won't take much time. Instead, we'll copy paste constant name, set name, and I put it Sunny. So here I give an input. Just copy paste to save time. Value is equal to this one. Sometimes it's difficult to remember the syntax. Okay, so now I'm going to uh, print here the name. You can see I'm changing something. I put it, let's say, React. So you are seeing whatever I'm putting in the input box, it is reflecting in the browser. So now event plus state work together. So we have a, let's try to understand it. We have a user action, the action triggers an event handler, the event handler updates state, React renders the component based on a new state, and the user sees the updated interface. So this simple cycle is behind a huge amount of React development, buttons, form, drop downs, modals, tabs, counters, filters, shopping carts, in fact, and many other interactive experience you will see. So once we understand this cycle, React start to feel much more predictable. Okay, so common beginner mistake. Before we move on, let's look at a few mistakes that beginners commonly make. The first is trying to mutate state directly, so never do it. So example, count is equal to count plus 1. This is not how React state should be updated. We use the setter. The second mistake is calling an event handler immediately. So remember, this on click is equal to handle click. You all you can see in my slide where I have ticked correct. This is the correct way. And the first one, this on click is equal to handle click brackets execute the function immediately. And the third issue is using a potentially stale state value when multiple updates depend upon the previous state. So that's where the functional updater becomes useful. These many seem like small details, but understanding them early will save you from a lot of confusing behavior later. So we already put it. I have not made the same design, but you can understand what I did here for counter 0. We made an increment button, a decrement button, and we can add a one reset button here as well. So inside in this scene example, we are going to use several fundamental. So let's do it. We will use it. We will make a proper design. So all the basics like JSX, component, state, events, event handlers, and TypeScript we already covered. And I sure we once we understand these fundamentals, we can use exactly the same principles to build much more complex interfaces. So let's make it better. Uh, Instead, let's. I don't want to spend much time on design for a proper design, as my main motto is to explain the React. Yeah. So one thing, let's put a reset button here. count is 0 currently. I clicked on increment, decrement, and now if I put on reset, it's again 0. So now let's summarize chapter 5. We started by understanding state. State, I will repeat again because it may be an interview question as well. So state, if somebody asks you in an interview, you say state represents data that can change over time and affect the UI. So we learned how to create state using the useState hook. We learned about React events such as onClick, onChange, and onSubmit. We learned how event handlers can update state. And we saw that when state changes, React renders the component again, so the UI reflects the latest state. We also looked at functional state updates and control inputs, and finally, we built an interactive counter that brings all of these concepts together. So, if you remember one thing from this chapter, remember user action changes state, and the state derives the UI. That's one of the most important mental models in React. The next chapter, we are going to learn how to control what appears on the screen using conditional rendering and list. We will see how React can show different UI depending on the application state. So see you in next chapter. Thank you.